The morning air hung heavy over the cracked asphalt of Hollow Creek, Georgia. A rusty old pickup truck sat alone in the near-empty library parking lot, its paint sun-faded and peeling at the edges. Elijah Carter bent down to tie the fraying laces of his worn work boots, a battered lunch pail resting on the hood. He adjusted the collar of his Navy janitor uniform, tugging it against the soft breeze that carried the smell of cut grass and exhaust. Out of nowhere, the shriek of tires ripped through the calm. A police cruiser swung hard into the lot, gravel spraying behind it. Before Elijah could even register what was happening, two white officers leapt out, guns drawn, faces hard. "Hands where we can see 'em, boy!" one barked, his voice cutting the quiet like a whip. Elijah froze, lifting his rough, calloused hands slowly into the morning air. There was no anger on his face, no fear either. Only a weary, practiced kind of calm. The kind a black man in America learned not to forget. The taller cop, Officer Hale, charged first, shoving Elijah roughly against the side of the truck. The metal groaned under the impact as Hale yanked Elijah's arms behind his back, snapping cold cuffs over his wrists. The second officer, Simmons, circled wide, weapon still trained, eyes twitching with suspicion. Across the street, a few white bystanders paused mid-step. An older man sipped his coffee and shook his head, muttering something under his breath. A woman clutching a grocery bag pulled her child closer. No one stepped forward. No one said a word, except one. A young black teenager, maybe 16, pulled out his phone and began recording, fingers trembling slightly but holding steady. As Hale jerked Elijah's arms higher, Elijah's voice finally broke the silence. Software measured. "What did I do?" The officer sneered without even glancing at him. "You fit the description," he spat, tightening the cuffs another notch for good measure. Elijah didn't argue. He didn't resist. He knew it wouldn't matter. Not here, not to them. Without reading him his rights, without explaining anything, Simmons stormed toward Elijah's truck. He flung open the door, rifling through the worn seats and old newspapers without a warrant, tossing aside Elijah's jacket and lunchbox onto the pavement. Loose coins scattered. A family photo fluttered in the wind, face down on the ground. A middle-aged neighbor from 2 houses down, Mr. Jennings, jogged over, waving his arms. "Hey, man, that's Elijah. He's been cleaning the library for years. What's the matter with you?" Before he could get closer, Simmons shoved him back with a firm hand to the chest. "Step back, sir. This doesn't concern you." Jennings stumbled, but didn't argue. He knew better. He wasn't the one with a gun pointed at him. Elijah's gaze didn't leave the cracked ground beneath his boots. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't tremble. He had lived through too many mornings like this to waste breath screaming. This wasn't about a crime. This wasn't about keeping the town safe. It was about a color they saw before they even saw his face. And deep down, Elijah knew. No matter how quiet he stayed, no matter how still he stood, some people would always see him as a threat. Not a man, not a neighbor, not a janitor who worked the night shift so kids could read clean books the next day. Just a black man standing too close to freedom. And today, that was enough. The holding cell smelled of bleach, rust, and old sweat. A single flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead, throwing long, tired shadows across the cracked concrete floor. Elijah sat on a cold metal bench bolted to the wall, his back straight, hands resting quietly in his lap, the cuffs finally removed, but the marks still raw around his wrists. He said nothing. He asked nothing. He knew better. Beyond the thick steel bars, Officer Hale leaned against the booking desk, twirling Elijah's ID card between his fingers like a toy. Officer Simmons clacked away at the ancient desktop computer, half watching the screen, half smirking at his partner's running commentary. "Bet he's got a rap sheet longer than Main Street," Hale chuckled, tossing Elijah's wallet onto the counter with a soft thud. "Yeah, or maybe he's the mastermind behind the great library heist," Simmons added, not looking up. Both men laughed, the casual, thoughtless kind of laughter that stung sharper than words. Elijah's hoodie was damp against his skin, the thin cotton offering no protection against the chill that seeped into the walls. His work boots, still muddy from the morning dew, left faint prints on the floor with every shift of his weight. The system groaned as Simmons pulled up Elijah's record. A few seconds later, the screen flashed a red alert. "Federal hold, do not process. Contact DHS immediately." Simmons frowned, leaned closer, tapped a few keys. Same result. Another bright red warning pulsed on the terminal. He snorted. "Looks like the system's glitching again," he said lazily, waving it off. "Probably flagged every janitor in the county." Hale didn't even glance at the screen. He was too busy texting someone on his phone, chuckling quietly at whatever joke was buzzing in his pocket. Neither man cared enough to read the fine print. Neither cared enough to think that maybe, just maybe, they were standing in the middle of something bigger than their small-town pride. In the cell, Elijah glanced up briefly, catching the red glow of the computer screen through the bars. He recognized the pattern, recognized the silent siren that neither cop was smart enough to hear. He dropped his gaze again, closing his eyes for a moment, breathing slow and steady. Not out of fear, out of preparation. He had waited years for a day like this, not hoping for it, not dreading it. Just knowing someday it would come. Across the room, Officer Hale leaned back in his chair, stretching with a loud yawn. "Bet you $50 he was snooping around the school next," he said, voice dripping with the kind of casual racism that didn't even bother to hide itself anymore. Simmons laughed under his breath. "Maybe we ought to charge him for loitering too. Toss in resisting arrest while we're at it. Beef up the paperwork." They didn't even look at Elijah while they said it. Didn't see the quiet rage building under his steady exterior. Didn't see the history layered in every scar on his knuckles, every silver streak in his hair. Didn't see a man who had survived more in 1 year than they would in a lifetime. They saw a uniform, a skin color, a stereotype. Nothing more. The clock above the exit door ticked loudly, each second scraping against the stillness of the room. Elijah counted them without trying. Each beat a drum in a march that had started long before he was born, a rhythm of patience, survival, and knowing when to stand still and when to move. The terminal blinked again, more urgent now. But the officers ignored it, still caught in their lazy assumptions, still believing they held the power. In the distance, barely audible, a low hum began to rise. Engines. More than one. Elijah opened his eyes and stared at the barred door, his lips pressing into a thin, unreadable line. They didn't know it yet, but their world was already changing. And this time, Elijah wouldn't have to lift a finger. The truth was coming. It was rolling in on 4 black wheels, with a badge they didn't dare laugh at. 7 minutes. Maybe less. He adjusted his jacket quietly, smoothing the wrinkles over his chest, and waited. Not with fear. Not with hope. With certainty. Officer Simmons tapped lazily on the keyboard, the screen flashing warnings he didn't bother to read. He grinned over at Hale. Booking him under suspicion and loitering. That'll teach him to hang around dumpsters looking shady. Hale chuckled, shaking his head. Add resisting arrest while you're at it, he said, tossing Elijah's worn wallet onto the desk like trash. Through the cell bars, Elijah sat motionless. Not because he had given up, but because he knew exactly how this game was played. Any word, any move, any glance too sharp, and they'd pile on whatever charges they wanted. Hale leaned over the desk and barked loud enough for Elijah to hear. "You're lucky we don't throw in assault for looking at us sideways." More laughter, the kind of laughter that didn't need an audience, didn't fear consequence. Elijah stayed silent. The cuffs had left his wrists burning, but he showed no sign of discomfort. His face, carved from patience and history, refused to give them anything. A notification dinged on Officer Simmons's phone. He glanced down, then scoffed. "Someone posted that video already," he muttered, scrolling carelessly. "Ain't nothing. Some punk kid recording a lawful arrest. Good luck proving otherwise." He laughed again and stuffed the phone back into his pocket. Outside the holding room, the small town moved on like it always did. Mothers buckled their children into car seats. Old men sipped coffee at the diner. The same people who'd seen Elijah thrown against his own truck and said nothing now ordered pancakes and talked about football scores. Inside, Simmons printed out the intake forms. Elijah's name, half misspelled, typed under primary suspect. The words looked official enough. Enough to justify bruises. Enough to justify a record. Enough to justify treating a man like an enemy for daring to exist. Hale signed the paperwork with a flourish. "Another menace off the streets," he said proudly, slapping the clipboard onto the desk. He didn't know Elijah's story. Didn't care. Didn't know that Elijah had built this town's school library shelves with his own hands. Didn't know that Elijah had volunteered late nights tutoring troubled teens. Didn't know because they never asked. They only looked, and they saw what they wanted to see. From his seat inside the cell, Elijah heard it all. He heard the printer humming, the pens scratching against forms, the officers congratulating themselves. He heard the lazy arrogance in every word, the way power dripped from their voices like something spoiled. A small buzz ran through the station as a few more officers wandered in, chuckling at the new arrest. Coffee cups in hand, badges shining under the harsh fluorescent lights. Another black man in cuffs was no cause for alarm here. It was barely cause for conversation. The clock on the wall ticked forward. The federal override on Simmons's computer flashed brighter now, pulsing red, almost demanding attention. Still ignored, still dismissed. Injustice wasn't loud here. It didn't come with screaming or riots. It came with paperwork, with shrugs, with coffee breaks and jokes behind closed doors. Elijah shifted his hands quietly, feeling the circulation returning to his fingers. The skin was tender, bruised deep under the surface. The pain didn't bother him. He was used to it. He had survived worse in places where the guns weren't pointed by bored small-town cops, but by men who didn't bother asking questions first. He had survived jungles where the air itself was a threat. He had survived boardrooms where his skin was seen as a liability. He had survived. He would survive this too. The voices in the front office grew louder, laughing about what charges to tack on. Disturbing the peace? Suspicious loitering? Anything to make it look justified. Because here, in Hollow Creek, the truth didn't matter. Perception did. and Elijah's skin color was all the jury they needed. He lowered his head slightly, not in defeat, but in measured stillness. He wasn't broken, he wasn't afraid, he was waiting. Because deep down, Elijah knew something they didn't. Something that was already rolling toward them, closer with every passing second. They thought they had all the power. They thought they held the pen that wrote the story. But they had forgotten one thing. The real story had already started, and they weren't holding the pen. The buzz of conversation faded as the landline rang, sharp and urgent, slicing through the lazy rhythm of the station. Officer Null, the young dispatcher, picked it up, her smile fading almost instantly. Her face turned pale. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, sir." Stopping all processing immediately. "Understood." She hung up without asking questions, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at Hale and Simmons. "You need to stop, right now," she said, voice strained. "Federal agents are en route. 7 minutes." Simmons frowned. "For this guy?" "You're kidding." Null shook her head, motioning towards the blinking computer terminal still screaming federal override warnings. "They said, 'Do not touch him. Do not speak to him. Do not move him.'" Hale laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Must be a mistake. Some damn glitch." In the holding cell, Elijah opened his eyes. No surprise, no fear. Just a slow, steady awareness that filled the room heavier than smoke. He straightened his jacket, his hands calm, steady. Through the frosted glass, faint engine noise grew louder. 3 black SUVs rolled up to the station in perfect formation, quiet as shadows. No sirens, no screeching tires. The doors didn't slam open. They clicked, crisp and deliberate. Out stepped 4 agents, each in black suits, earpieces coiled behind their ears, expressions unreadable. They didn't bark commands. They didn't need to. The very air shifted around them, pulling the ground out from under everyone who thought they understood how today was going to go. Leading them was a tall black man in his early 50s, silver streaks cutting clean lines through his close-cropped hair, a navy tie knotted tight at his throat. Agent Marcus Vance. Eyes cold, steps measured. He didn't glance around, didn't hesitate. He walked straight into the station lobby, scanning the room once, absorbing everything. The laughter, the smug faces, the barely filed paperwork. And then his gaze cut through the noise, pinning Hale and Simmons in place without a single word. "Who arrested Elijah Carter?" His voice was low, but carried a weight that left no room for lies. Hale opened his mouth, but no words came out. Simmons tried to step forward. We did," he stammered. "Suspicious activity report." He matched the call description. He had tools. He was carrying. Vance lifted a hand, silencing him without even looking at him. "You ran his ID?" "Yes, sir," Hale said quickly. "That," Vance said, voice razor-sharp, "was your first mistake." The other agents moved without being told. One pulled footage from the surveillance cameras. Another accessed the station's database directly, bypassing every local system. Inside the cell, Elijah stood up slowly. The movement was unhurried, dignified. Vance himself unlocked the door, stepping inside without a moment's hesitation. "Asset Carter," he said, his voice dropping into something almost respectful. "I'm Agent Vance. We're here to pull you out." Elijah tilted his head slightly, studying Vance like a man measuring the years between old battles. "About time?" Elijah said quietly, voice steady. Vance nodded once. We've been tracking the leak. You triggered a dormant protocol. Your status was supposed to remain buried. Elijah's mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. So it's happening then. It's moving fast. Behind them, Hale and Simmons watched, frozen, unable to comprehend what was unfolding. The janitor they had mocked, cuffed, humiliated, wasn't just someone. He was someone they were supposed to fear. Vance turned to them, his tone colder than the winter outside. You detained a black-level federal asset without authority, without cause, without rights. Hale swallowed hard, the sound loud in the stillness. We didn't know. Vance's jaw tightened. No, he said, ice dripping from the single word. You didn't ask. In the back office, Agent Rivera pulled a confidential file from the system, slapping it down onto the booking desk. A short paragraph, but the words inside weighed more than any badge in that room. Operative Elijah Carter. Embedded Operations. Southeast Asia. Eastern Europe. Federal clearance. Black level. Status. Dormant program protocol activated. Null stared at it, her hands shaking. Hale took a step back. Simmons looked like he might throw up. None of them moved toward Elijah again. None of them said another word. They understood, too late, that they had arrested a man built from missions they would never even hear about, whose existence was classified because his enemies still hunted him across oceans. Elijah didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply picked up his worn jacket, straightened it over his shoulders, and walked out beside Agent Vance without looking back. The door clicked shut behind him. Not a slam. Not a bang. Just a quiet finality that echoed louder than any siren ever could. The door clicked behind Elijah, leaving a suffocating silence in the station lobby. Officer Hale shifted on his feet, glancing sideways at Simmons, who was as pale as a sheet. Inside the captain's office, Agent Rivera worked methodically, pulling surveillance footage from the station's servers. Every laugh, every shove, every illegal search. All of it, saved and documented. Agent Vance stood quietly by the counter, watching Hale and Simmons with a gaze sharp enough to cut through stone. This footage, Rivera said without emotion, will be entered into the Federal Misconduct Review. Hale opened his mouth to protest but caught himself. He knew there was no explanation that would save him now. Null, the young dispatcher, sat frozen at her desk, eyes darting between the agents and her co-workers. She hadn't touched Elijah. She hadn't mocked him. But even silence, she realized now, had a weight. Vance approached the main terminal, pulling up the system logs. The federal hold alert blinked back at him, flashing in angry red letters. Ignored. Multiple times. He turned slowly toward the captain, who had just emerged from the back hallway, his face dark with confusion. Who authorized continued processing after a federal hold was issued? Vance asked, voice low and steady. The captain hesitated, caught between loyalty and survival. We thought it was an error. It happens sometimes. Glitches. Vance didn't blink. You thought wrong. The weight of those words settled over the room like a funeral shroud. No shouting, no violence, just a cold, inevitable sinking feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Rivera handed Vance a thin, sealed file, stamped with a bright red classification band. Vance flipped it open, reading silently for a moment before speaking. Elijah Carter was classified under Dormant Program Protocol in 2004, he said, his voice cutting clean through the stagnant air. After critical exposure risks overseas, he was reassigned stateside. His identity was buried for a reason. He closed the file with a soft snap. And today, your station compromised that reason. Hale finally found his voice, stammering. We didn't know. We didn't. He looked like... He stopped himself too late. The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. Vance's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He looked like what? Hale looked at the floor, saying nothing. You profiled him, Vance said, not a question. A black man near a truck. That was enough. Simmons stepped back, wishing he could disappear into the floor. Vance turned to Null, his expression softening slightly. You didn't touch him. Null shook her head quickly. You asked questions. You hesitated. A long pause stretched between them. That matters. Rivera pulled up the final report on the screen. Timestamps, footage, full account logged. The damage was done. The local DA would be notified. Internal Affairs would investigate. And somewhere far above them, Washington would demand explanations that Hollow Creek wasn't ready to give. Outside, the black SUVs still waited, silent and patient. A reminder that real power didn't need sirens. Elijah was already gone, whisked away to a location none of them would ever be cleared to know. His presence scrubbed clean from the booking system, leaving only an ugly stain in their memories. Vance gathered the files into a leather case, his movements precise. As he turned to leave, he looked over his shoulder one last time. Remember this day, he said quietly, because men like him built the walls you hide behind, and men like you crack them. Without another word, he stepped out into the fading light. Inside the station, nobody moved for a long time. The clock ticked steadily above the door. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, not rushing toward salvation, but echoing the collapse of pride, arrogance, and small-town ignorance. Hale dropped heavily into a chair, his hands trembling slightly. Simmons leaned against the wall, his breath shallow. Null sat still, staring at the empty holding cell where Elijah Carter had waited, calm and silent, knowing all along what was coming. She had stayed silent when it mattered. And today, she had learned what it meant to listen. The news didn't break with a bang. It seeped into Hollow Creek like a slow, bitter rain. First came the murmurs, whispers over diner counters, quick glances exchanged between neighbors, half-finished sentences muttered behind closed doors. Then came the headlines, Small-town officers under investigation after wrongful arrest of decorated federal asset. Local papers picked it up first, then regional stations, then national outlets, their sharp voices slicing through the town's usual hush like cold knives. By noon the next day, the Hollow Creek Police Department's website was down, buried under a flood of angry comments. By sundown, satellite news vans lined the edges of the courthouse square. The town that prided itself on being quiet, respectful, decent, was now a blinking dot on America's growing map of shame. Inside the station, the atmosphere curdled. Officer Hale was pulled into a closed-door meeting that lasted barely 10 minutes. When he emerged, he didn't make eye contact with anyone. He stripped off his badge, dropped it onto the captain's desk, and walked out without a word. Suspended without pay, pending full investigation, likely facing federal charges for civil rights violations. Officer Simmons didn't even get a meeting. A plain envelope sat on his desk, heavy with finality. Inside, an official notice of reassignment, effective immediately. Not a promotion, not even a demotion. A shove sideways into a paperwork job 2 counties over, where no badge number, no seniority would protect him. The captain himself faced a formal reprimand, a black mark that would quietly follow him until retirement. A stain no press conference or heartfelt apology could ever scrub clean. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd gathered, not shouting, not chanting, just standing, silent, present. Black faces, brown faces, white faces, too. Not many, but enough. Enough to show the world that someone was paying attention. The old man from the library's corner lot, Mr. Jennings, stood among them, arms folded tightly across his chest. The young black teenager who had filmed the arrest stood too, his phone raised again, this time not out of fear, but out of duty. Justice wasn't loud here. It didn't come with roaring crowds or burning banners. It came in small, deliberate steps. Suspensions, transfers, public shame. The wheels turned slowly, but they turned. Elijah Carter, meanwhile, remained unseen. There were no press conferences with him behind a podium, no victory laps, no interviews. He had disappeared the same way he had lived, quietly, with purpose, like a shadow moving just beyond reach. A few days later, a small, unnoticed article ran in the back pages of a local newspaper. Town Library honors Elijah Carter's service. A memorial bench installed near the children's reading section. No ceremony, no speeches, just a simple plaque. In honor of years of quiet service and unspoken courage. Few noticed when it was placed. Fewer understood what it really meant. But those who needed to know, knew. At the station, Null packed her things into a cardboard box, her heart heavier than she let on. She had been offered a temporary position liaising with federal investigators, a rare opportunity. Not because she was exceptional, not because she was perfect, but because, in a town that chose silence, she had hesitated. She had listened. And sometimes that was enough. Outside, the world moved on. Families shopped for groceries. Kids rode bikes down cracked sidewalks. Flags fluttered gently above City Hall. But under the quiet, under the surface, something had shifted. The old assumptions, who mattered, who didn't, had been cracked open, just a little. And though the town would never say it aloud, though no one would dare frame it in speeches or statues, they all felt it. A new kind of watching, a new kind of knowing. Because once you see injustice happen right in front of you, once you realize how easily silence can become violence, you don't forget it. You carry it. Just like Elijah Carter carried so many things. And just like, now, Hollow Creek would carry the memory of what they tried to hide, and what they could never undo. Weeks slipped by like slow-moving clouds over Hollow Creek. The news vans packed up and moved on to the next story. The angry comments under online articles faded into old threads, buried under new scandals. The courthouse lawn grew quiet again, save for the sound of flags snapping against the breeze. But something was different. Something subtle. Something heavy. Inside the now half-empty police station, the new recruits walked quieter. The old veterans stopped laughing so loud at the booking desk, and the dispatchers checked twice before labeling a call suspicious. A scar had formed where pride used to sit. Not healed, not forgotten, just there, undeniable. At a small veterans recovery center tucked between the Appalachian foothills, Elijah Carter sat in a folding chair under a cracked basketball hoop, watching the sun bleed orange across the evening sky. No crowds, no applause, no cameras, just a handful of young veterans, each carrying invisible wounds heavier than any rucksack they had ever worn. One of them, barely in his 20s, rubbed at the sleeve of his hoodie, voice raw and uncertain. "I can't sleep," he said quietly. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, in the convoy, in the sand, in the blood." Another shifted uncomfortably, nodding in silent agreement. Elijah leaned forward slowly, elbows resting on his knees, his voice low and even. "You never forget," he said. "You just learn how to carry it without letting it carry you." The young man looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "How long does that take?" Elijah let a slow breath escape, the weight of years pressing against his spine. "I'll let you know when it does," he said, a faint glimmer of something like a smile brushing across his face. The group fell into a thoughtful silence, the kind that didn't need filling, the kind that said everything important without a single extra word. As the session wrapped up, Elijah lingered behind, staring out across the tree line where the shadows stretched long and lazy. A young volunteer approached him hesitantly, holding out a plain manila envelope. "This was left for you," she said. No name, just said it was important. Elijah took it with a nod, waiting until she had walked away before opening it. Inside was a single photograph, old and grainy. A man standing proud in front of a United Nations peacekeeping center. Dark skin, strong eyes, the unmistakable echo of a boy Elijah once carried through a jungle, wrapped in rice sacks to hide the blood. On the back, written in simple block letters, "You gave me a chance. I used it." Elijah stared at the photo for a long time, feeling the years stretch out between them like an old bridge built plank by plank across impossible distance. He folded the picture carefully, slipping it into the inner pocket of his jacket. No words, no ceremony, just a quiet understanding that some things mattered far more than recognition. Outside, the evening air grew cooler. Leaves rustled along the cracked sidewalk, whispering secrets no one else seemed to hear. Elijah rose slowly, his knees stiff but strong, and walked toward the old pickup truck parked beneath the lone street lamp. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Some battles are fought with guns. Some are fought with silence. Some are fought simply by surviving in a world that keeps trying to erase you. Elijah Carter had survived. Not because he was unbreakable, not because he was fearless, but because he had never let them decide who he was. He carried secrets. He carried scars. But most of all, he carried the simple, stubborn truth that dignity could not be handcuffed or erased. And tonight, as the town quietly healed its bruises, as Hollow Creek stumbled forward into an uneasy future, Elijah didn't need to say a thing. The truth spoke loud enough without him. It always had.